Hello watch enthusiasts. Now today I'd like to talk about the Omega Speedmaster range, so I thought it would be appropriate to have a photograph of an astronaut wearing one. Now it's been a while since I've done a video like this where I go over a brand's range, or lineup, but one of my viewers prompted me to make this video, so as a result I will dutifully make it. Now I would like to point out at this point that I'm not going to include the Speedmaster X33 or the Spacemaster Z33, simply because I don't consider them to be core Speedmaster pieces. Now to begin, I'd like to talk about the classic, the daddy of the Speedmaster. This is the Speedmaster Professional, and this watch is an icon. It's definitely the most well-known of all the Speedmasters, and is the most classic and true to the original. Now in standard guise, this watch comes with a simple black dial and loomed indices with the tachometer on the bezel around the sides. It also has the standard Hesselite crystal, that domed sort of plastic crystal, which gives it a very old-fashioned look, but the watch wouldn't be the same without it. Now the case size is 42mm, and the water resistance of this watch is 50 meters, which is perfectly fine for a watch which isn't designed specifically for use around water. Now the movement on this watch is an Omega caliber 1861, which is a very, very famous manually wound chronograph movement, and is the one that was worn on the moon. It has a power reserve of 48 hours, and of course, as I've said, it is manually wound. So you will have to wind it every morning, or every 2 days. But it really is an icon as far as movements go, and to a purist, this is the movement to have. Now, it doesn't have a date function either, which some people will find a problem. I personally don't find that to be an issue at all. Now, there are a couple of limited editions which have been made and which are based on the Professional directly. Now, the first of which is the Apollo 13 Silver Snoopy Award Speedmaster, and this version has a white dial with various features, because it commemorates the Silver Snoopy Award given to the astronauts of Apollo 13. Now, this watch features exactly the same technical features as the Professional, so I won't go into those, but the differences are the white dial and the fact that the borders of the indices are loomed rather than the actual pip in the middle, which does lead to a rather odd look, really, with the loom. It's an acquired taste, I suppose. And the Snoopy on the left-hand side subdial is also loomed, so that's also visible at night. It should also be pointed out that there is an engraving of Snoopy in space, made from 925 silver, which is attached to the back of the watch, and that is handmade in Le Locle. So there is real craftsmanship that goes into this watch. Another limited edition, which is based on the Professional and does also have all the same technical features, is the Apollo 11 45th anniversary version. Now, this watch is actually very attractive. I wouldn't wear one just because I'm not a fan of gold sports watches, but is a really beautiful piece, and it features things like, for example, the dial is engraved with is laser engraved, but rather than engraving the numerals, it actually cuts away all the material around them, which means that the numerals stand raised above the rest of the dial. Now, this watch actually comes on a brown NATO strap, which is the same colour as the dial. And though I'm not a fan of brown dials on watches, I think this one really works. Now, this watch is based on the 1962 Speedmaster, which was the first Omega in space, hence the name First Omega in Space. And this features the same movement as the Professional, so that manually wound 1861 caliber, with all the same specifications, but is housed in a case that was designed in 1957, which was the original design for the Speedmaster case before it had a more rugged design that was introduced slightly later in the 60s. So as you can see, the lugs are a much more straight type, and the crown and pushes are more exposed. This watch does also feature a sapphire crystal, which is just as domed as the Professional's one, but is now sapphire, meaning it's much more resistant to scratches. Equally, the case diameter has been dropped to 39.7mm, meaning that it's more comfortable on the wrist, or at least smaller on the wrist for the smaller wristed types like myself. Now, in order to cater to modern demands, Omega also fits some of its watches with 9300 caliber movements, and these are Omega's coaxial versions with that coaxial escapement, meaning there's far less friction within the movement, thus leading to longer service intervals and a smaller need for oil. Now, these movements are also automatic, as you can see, rather than being manually wound like the classic Speedmasters. And these go into a line of watches other than the sort of vintage-styled versions. Now, the version of the watch which is the first actually to get this movement is the standard Professional Coaxial. Now, this differs from the standard Professional because it has a variety of modern upgrades. For example, this watch has a sapphire crystal with anti-reflective on both sides, whereas the standard one has the Hesselite glass. It also is water resistant to 100 meters rather than 50 meters, so one can actually swim with this watch without any concern of flooding it. Equally, it is slightly larger at 44.25 millimeters in diameter, meaning that it is substantially larger than the 41 millimeter of the classic version. Equally, this watch is chronometer certified, which does mean that it has a greater accuracy than the older movement. Now, another more obvious difference is the fact that it's a bicompax dial, so it has 2 subdials rather than 3, and then a date has been put at the 6 o'clock position. Now, I have mixed feelings about this, because it does mean that the subdials are more difficult to read, because as you can see, the right-hand subdial is reading both the chronograph minutes and hours, as it now has 2 hands. So it is more difficult to read at a glance. On the other hand, it does unclutter the dial and leave more space for the date. Now, several versions of this watch have been made in ceramic. Most notably, and well, at least the most popular, has been the Dark Side of the Moon version, which is made entirely out of black ceramic. And this does make the watch lighter and much more scratch resistant than steel. But does make the whole thing more brittle, so if one were to drop one's watch, rather than denting, you would shatter it, which is, of course, a catastrophic thing to happen to one of these watches. However, it does show that Omega is really innovating with their new wristwatches. Now, I rather like the Dark Side of the Moon with the visible indices, but they have also made one with black indices, which I really don't understand because it does compromise legibility very much. Now, the grey side of the moon appeals to those who like the tone of metal, but still want the ceramic. And this is effectively grey ceramic with a grey dial. And I rather like this watch too. I think it has a very nice tone to it. And it's not a harsh tone; it's a soft grey, which I think is very appealing. Now, finally, the last watch which they make in ceramic is the white side of the moon. And I'm not going to pretend anything. I really do think this watch is hideous. I think the white is just overpowering, and especially on the crocodile strap which it's sold on, the whole item looks absolutely hideous. Now, Omega does also make some other versions of the Speedmaster with that coaxial movement that aren't in the Moonwatch lineup, and one notable piece is the Speedmaster 57. Now, this watch actually shares its case design with the first Omega in space, with that traditional design that Speedmaster originally had before it was redesigned in the 60s to have a more robust case. However, this watch has a 41.5mm case to the 39.7mm case on the first Omega in space, and I must say this is a very nice watch. It takes all the classic touches of the first Omega in space and then brings them up to the modern specification. Now, like the Coaxial, this has the 9300 caliber movement and the same dial layout, so I won't comment on that. However, I must say I do love the broad arrow hands on this particular version of it, which just look absolutely beautiful. And I must say, my dream collection would have this watch with the broad arrow hands and the new Seamaster 300 with those broad arrow hands too, because I just think they're the most elegant hands that can be put on a watch. Now, this watch is water resistant to 100 meters, like the new Coaxial Professional, and has the same scratch-resistant sapphire crystal, meaning that it really is brought up to modern specifications, and you can swim with this watch if you so please. Now, this watch is available in countless versions, but another favourite of mine is the blue and red dial, which I think really does look very vintage, very classic, while still looking quite contemporary due to those red hands. Now, one watch in the Speedmaster range which I absolutely love, which I feel few people love it with me, is the Mark II. And this is an oddity, really, because it's rare that I want one of the cheapest watches in a lineup. And this watch coming in at just under £4,000 is just that. It's interesting because this watch is based on a watch from 1969. It was the Mark II, designed to sort of rejuvenate the Speedmaster range. Of course, it didn't do so, but it did make a very funky and interesting piece. Now, this watch features a coaxial movement, but not the one that you would expect. It's an Omega 3330 movement, which is allegedly a lesser movement to the 9300 calibers. But however, this does feature a 3 subdial display with the date on the third and bottom subdial, which for me is perfect. I mean, because then I get my 3 subdials and the date rather than having to settle for 2. It equally features a very interesting design on the tachymeter, which is actually beneath the crystal and isn't a separate bezel, meaning that it can't be damaged in any way. Now, the only thing which I can see being an issue with this watch is the fact that the movement has a slightly shorter power reserve of 52 hours to the 60 hours of the standard 9300 caliber. So, I mean, that is something to bear in mind with this piece, even though it is still coaxial. Now, the case design of this watch is very different. It is in fact a tonneau-style case, with these polished bevels, but primarily it's sort of sunburst brushed, which gives the whole watch a very old-fashioned sort of 70s vibe, while not looking sort of overly dated. One nice touch is that the loom is actually beneath the tachymeter bezel, so the loom shines through the gaps in the sort of floating tachymeter underneath the crystal. Now, this watch is water resistant to 100 meters, meaning that this really is a sports watch, and can be worn while swimming as well. Now, in terms of the size of this watch, it's very comfortably 42.4 millimeters by 46.2. So its lug length is actually very short, meaning that it'll fit on most wrists, in fact all wrists really, perfectly well without any problems. Now, my favourite version of this watch is the orange and grey version, because I think it has a very sort of space and aviation style, which I find very nostalgic and very interesting, rather than going for the plain black, which I'd say suits the Professional better. Another line of Speedmasters which some people like and some people don't is the racing Speedmaster. Now, before becoming the Moon Watch, this watch was meant to be a racing watch, like the Rolex Daytona. This racing version really does go back to its roots then. And this features the same movement as the Mark II, so that's to say the 3330 caliber movement, with that slightly shorter power reserve, but still with that 3 subdial design, which I can understand using, because if you're driving a car while timing, for example, it's best to be legible at a glance. So these watches come in several variants, in various different colours, with those tyre treads style straps even, but they are also available on bracelets. So there's, for example, this yellow one with these yellow accents, which I think is very modern and very interesting. Another version which I think is quite attractive is the blue dial version, because this watch, in my opinion, is quite elegant and quite subdued compared to some of the other Speedmasters on the market. However, this version I will never understand. I don't see why Omega made this one, because it's just so unbearably bright and brash. And the problem with this, having it in that red, with those red accents, is that because it's such a bright red, it does make, you know, a very expensive watch look quite cheap, which is a shame. Finally, Omega also makes the HB SIA solar GMT Speedmaster with that sort of carbon fibre style dial, which is, of course, the solar section of the watch. And I'm not particularly keen on this watch personally. I think the dial is very busy and lacks the refinement of older Speedmasters. This watch has a GMT function as well, and shares the case of the Professional, the Coaxial versions. It's 44.25mm wide and water resistant to 10 bar. Now, inside this watch there is the Omega 3603. So this watch isn't actually solar powered. It's just that dial style is sort of a nod to it. This is more of an aviation watch, and does of course feature a 52-hour power reserve and GMT function. Anyway, I'm going to end on that photograph of Buzz Aldrin wearing his Speedmaster in space. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Do please like, share and subscribe if you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more content on my channel. So thank you very much for watching. This is Arm on the Watch Guy, over and out.